Okay. I want to thank everybody for logging in and attending. I hope that this meets your expectations. Welcome to All Access Pass, how Richland Library went Deweyless, or very nearly almost completely Deweyless. We still have a few outliers. I am Melissa Bigpen. I've been with Richland Library for just over 26 years, and I started as a cataloger. I also now manage our electronic resources, but for this project, I did put my cataloging hat back on.
And I am Kristen Anderson, and I've worked for Richland Library for just under 6 years. I started out working at a branch and then was hired on as the access librarian and worked on this project for a year and a half until its completion. And then ended up going back to the same branch that I left from and returned as a branch librarian. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to ask that if you guys have any questions that you use the chat box. We are going to try and monitor that as we go along, but we may not get directly to questions until the very end. However, if you have them, and we anticipate that you will, please be sure to let us know, and we will get to them whenever we can. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to define access and touch on our goal in reclassifying the collection, speak about the timeline and the process that we undertook. We will speak to the positive and the problematic aspects of the new classification scheme, and then finally there are some things that we learned in the process. So what is access? We should probably start there. Access is a locally developed word-based classification system that Richland Library uses. So why did we change? We decided to change to increase transparency for our staff and customers and enhance the browsing experience in our nonfiction collection.
Okay, it all started back in 2013. We got a USDA grant and matching funds from Richland County to renovate and expand our Eastover location, and that renovated facility opened in 2013. The word-based classification at that time had been adopted by a couple of library systems that you are probably familiar with, the Maricopa County Library District and the Rangeview Library District, which in the process of doing that rebranded as Anythink Library. Our smallest branch, Eastover, was our initial experiment with the concept, and it was very well received. And it initiated our project to go ahead and reclassify the entire collection. At the point when we were doing this at Eastover, we were still referring to the new scheme as BISAC. BISAC, just as a reminder, is the Book Industry Standards and Communication. It's essentially a subject scheme that publishers and booksellers use to organize their product. And BISAC, that scheme, was the starting point for our own word-based scheme. So this was our most recent rebranding, and you are probably very familiar with this. We hope, if our marketing team has done their job correctly. Early on, we recognized that we needed a name for our scheme that reflects our brand and mission. The other library systems, which I mentioned before, had gone with, Maricopa went with Shelf Logic as their scheme name, and Rangeview or Anythink went with WordThink as their name. And after much thought and debate, we arrived at Access. We are having some, there we go.
There we go. Decided I didn't want to look there for a second.
All right. So Access was one of our strategic plan projects for 2013 through 15, and this is our team. And this team was our strategic plan team from several different departments, heavy on collection development, however. And the team created the preliminary classification lists based on BISAC and also mapped out the procedure for access work in large location branches, which would not be classified on-site by a team from collection development, and I'll speak about that a little bit more later. But this is a picture of many of our members of the collection development department and team, but there were many more people involved in this project. With a project of this kind of scale, we needed many hands and many brains to pull it off. And this is just a small list of the many, many people who worked very hard to make this happen. All right. So we have a slightly different situation than many libraries. We have divided our locations into small locations and large locations. The small locations were the first ones that we reclassified. I have included some collection numbers just so you can kind of see the scale of differences in the locations. These numbers are not just nonfiction, they're for the entire collection. The small location material does float, but it only floats among the small locations. And we expected that those collections would stand alone as their own collection with their own scheme. One thing that we learned in this process, we started with the smallest location. It actually was not quite detailed enough to accommodate the collection in our largest location, which was North Main. So we skipped ahead to North Main and accessed that first. We expanded the scheme slightly, and then we were able to then apply it to our sort of median-sized locations, Blythewood and Wheatley. We did this by packing up portable units with everything we needed, computers, scanners, printers for labels, and our team from the main library, we would spend 2 to 4 days at a site, take everything off the shelves, completely disrupt business, but we were still open for business during all of this, and everybody was quite patient. And relabeled everything, reclassified, came up with our expanded scheme, and put everything back on the shelves, hopefully in a reasonable semblance of order. And when we did that, we did both the children's and the adult collections in one sweep, and that was completed in the spring of 2015, which was a good thing, because that is just about the time that we really started very early in 2015 on our main library collection. So these are our large locations, and our large locations are considerably larger than our small, and also they float material among only these locations. The classification scheme is considerably more detailed because the collections are both larger and deeper. At this stage, the collection development team tackled the main library, which is obviously by far the largest collection. As we worked through that process, we would then push the finished scheme out to the branches who would do their own. The children's room staff, with guidance from Leah Bardis, who is our collection development manager, and Jessica Bingham, who is our youth collections librarian, were actually primarily responsible for both creating the scheme for our children's collection and for handling the books, relabeling and reclassifying the collection. So they did a great deal of work on that. Then the teams at the branches were responsible for pulling their material off, for adding them to record sets, which in Polaris is the thing. And then the collection development team could go into those record sets, check them, reclassify them, print labels, and send them out to the branches for actual application onto the books. And the branch staff was also responsible for figuring out how they were going to manage their space, what was coming off the shelves, where it was going to go when it went back on the shelves, and how they were going to accommodate those two parts of the collection while they were in transition.
So as we have mentioned, during this time, our main branch was under construction, which made things both easier and more difficult at the same time. Starting in February of 2015, we prepared for the renovation of the main library building and branch closures as the buildings also underwent extensive renovation. The entire collection at Main was relocated several times as the renovation moved from floor to floor, starting with our third floor and progressing through the garden level where the children's room is located. Some parts of the collection, primarily the children's material, was put into storage temporarily. Most of the collection was available, however, during the renovation and reclassification process. Branches also closed for renovation. Small collections were housed in temporary cottages at most branch locations. Some materials floated to other branches, and much was put into storage. Once the construction started, the decisions about which area of the access scheme would be classified next was ultimately driven by the parts of the collection that would be housed in the newly renovated space. Our goal was to have only access classified material on the shelves in these new spaces. This also meant that we were not reclassifying material in the order that was most efficient for the branches, unfortunately. So next we're going to talk just a little bit about the process that we went through and how this all shook out. We would start by creating a preliminary list of access headings based on BISAC. We would then pull material from the shelves based on the two ranges that will be reclassified into the target area. We then went and we assessed material for currency of content, recent use, and physical condition, and we ended up weeding quite a bit of material during this project. We then would take our large sorting table and create piles of books that fit into each category, and then evaluate the amount of material in each pile. We were basically going for about 40 to 50 books per subheading. If there weren't enough material, then we would combine smaller piles into broader categories as necessary, or split large piles into narrower categories as necessary. However, this very rarely happened. We then took Post-it notes and would label the piles with the access headings and made sure that we transcribed exactly as it should appear on the spine label with any instructions as necessary. We went through a lot of Post-it notes, probably should have bought stock in 3M. And then we transcribed categories to the master list that we were keeping in Excel with notes based on the decisions that we had made. This is just a picture of Melissa, myself, and Jessica Bingham at our sorting table. Jessica is to the far left, I'm in the middle, and Melissa is going to be to the far right. And you can see we've got piles of books in front of us. You can't even see the table in this picture. And then on the very back wall, you can see we've got Post-it notes up there, and we actually used any area that we could get to kind of put our Post-it notes up and kind of go through and figure out what our headings were going to be. This is a better picture of our sorting table. You can see that we used it for multiple things. The table was originally designed for opening boxed shipments of books, but it was also used to process newspapers and magazines. At one point, we were reclassifying one area of the access categories on the counter and another on tables at the other end of the room as our construction deadlines doomed. And this is a great picture, so you can see the table, how long it is. You can see we've got a cart here in the front with materials. So there were so many carts all around us during this process. And then you can see our piles of books there towards the front. This picture actually shows a little bit better how we used our Post-it notes, especially for more complex subject areas. We found them an effective way of making notes on the fly and as we were reclassifying, because we were able to add, delete, and rearrange the Post-it notes easily before transcribing them to our Excel-based list. In this picture, you can see that we are working on religion. One of the challenging aspects in this process is selecting terms that fit well onto the labels, preferably without needing to be abbreviated or truncated, and that were also meaningful, sufficiently broad or narrow as needed, and were not too highly charged emotionally or politically. Going a little bit deeper into detail about our spine labels, and here you've got a couple of really great pictures that illustrate everything I'm about to talk about. We had a couple of parameters that we were operating within per Baker and Taylor, which we will get to a little bit later. But we basically had a max of 12 characters per line and a max of 6 lines per label, which had to include our call number prefix, any volume designation, and also the cutter that we wanted to use when creating the scheme. You can see that the major subject heading is in all caps and everything that follows is not in all caps. And that's how you can tell what exactly is the major subject heading when you're looking at the label. You'll also notice that as you go down further on the spine label, that it goes from broad to much more narrow in detail of what the book is going to be about. However, we had some first level headings like craft hobby that required 2 lines because they would not fit onto 1 line. So we had to also take that into account. But we were trying really hard to not abbreviate or truncate any terms for clarity's sake. However, it did happen in a couple of areas.
So this is actually an email that I wrote, and it illustrates a little bit of the process that we went through in various places, deciding on our subheadings. In this case, we had a section in our small location scheme already that was sports followed by martial, and that indicated martial arts. That's your karate and your taekwondo and your judo. But when we got to the large locations, we have a much larger and broader collection, and we wanted to collect more types of sort of combat sports, and combat was the term that I landed on as a possibility. That way we could combine our martial arts with wrestling and boxing and even fencing under a much broader term, combat. That would make that section large enough for a subdivision, but also narrow enough to still be browsable with all those related materials. We were reminiscing that the sports was easy. Sports was easy to classify.
It was so easy compared to other areas like history.
Yeah.
And literature.
This is another example. And it's a little in the weeds, but it pertains to our children's classification categories. And as you know, if you're familiar with classifying by Dewey, when you get into the animal classification, which is a very popular topic among children, The Dewey uses the scientific classification, name, class, species, family, all of that. But for our browsing collection, we don't so much use that. So we ran into a question about pill bugs. Pill bugs are technically crustaceans. But because most crustaceans that we have material about in our children's collection happen to be water-dwelling animals, the term crustacean ended up under animals underwater, where we gathered together all the water-dwelling animals. So to put pill bugs or roly-polies in their designated scientific classification, they would have been lost among all of the water-dwelling animals, drowned among a group of animals to which they were technically related, but not easily findable. And I was just pointing out that instead of using insect or other technically correct terms, we had landed on bug as a category because it is a popular term and it is a broad term and it works well for browsing. And because the popular term for pill bug is bug, and because most people would expect to find it in our bug classification, that is where we were going to put it.
So on this slide, you guys will see a list of all of the subject headings that we have currently housed on our third floor, which is also our business and research collection. And we made sure that everything that went onto the third floor was somehow relatable to either business or research. The completion date for the third floor access was January of 2016. The collection was moved to the third floor and was shelved by a moving company. However, collection development then spent many hours checking the shelves, shifting, and fitting the collection onto our new shelves. And here you will see a list of all of the subject headings that we have on our second floor, which is our studio and also our studio services area, and also where we have our fiction collection. And you can see that this is much more, it's not going to be your research type materials that, we moved up to the third floor. The completion date for this floor was May 31st, 2016. The collection, just like with the third floor, was moved and shelved by a moving company. And then collection development staff came in and spent many, many hours checking the shelves, shifting, and fitting the collection onto new shelves. With the completion of access on the second floor, the entire access scheme was essentially complete. At this point, we began the second wave of work, which included identifying problem areas and making adjustments to the scheme as needed. At the same time, collection development was working with branch collections as those collections began to reopen post-renovation. A good bit of this involved assessing the collection for condition and age as they came out of storage and making label corrections. And we made a lot of label corrections. So with any really large project, there's something that is essential, and that is communication. With pieces of the collection moving from one location to another, daily updates to various staff was a crucial part of this process, especially as the pace of work picked up towards the end of the project. Circulation staff needed to know which Dewey numbers were to be sent to collection development for access. Shelvers needed to know where to shelve newly accessed material and the remaining Dewey material. And volunteers needed to know where to look for holes. Reference staff needed to know what was accessed, what was still in Dewey, and where to find everything. Branch staff needed to know what parts of the access scheme are finalized and ready to apply to branch material. Technology needed to know to update reports with each change, and collection development staff needed to know all of the above and the location and status of all the material and process in the department. So a lot of moving parts.
So this is just an example of the kind of email that we would send out as we were working on pulling things off the shelves, reclassifying them and relocating them to different shelves. And it's very specific at this point. Everybody needed to know exactly what was moving and where it was going. At the end, we were getting really close to finishing up the 700s and decided that it just all needed to come to collection development so that we could sort it out for everybody.
Yeah, we basically had carts of books just lined up, things that needed to be accessed, and we would just pull those carts as needed and access them. But we found, towards the end that it was just easier just to send it all our way.
Yeah. We did try for a turnaround time of 1 to 2 days when we pulled things off of a section so that we could get it back up on the shelves as quickly as possible. Sometimes nobody could find it by that time, but we tried our best to make that clear.
So, shift happens. This is a term that we really like and that I've actually ended up taking to my branch. And I tell people whenever they don't want to shift, that shift happens. Shifting is an integral part of, of collection maintenance just in general. But for this project, it was crucial because every location, every project, every movement, shifting parts of the collection, and everyone had to do it, although no one particularly enjoyed it.
So we did learn a few things and are going to share some of those with you.
Yep. So, like with any project, there are going to be positives and some problematic areas. This is a list of some of the positives that we believe came about from changing from a number-based system to a word-based system. Words are easier to understand than numbers, especially for somebody who's not a cataloger. Children are now able to very quickly browse and find their favorite books either in bugs or monkeys or what have you. Access is also something that we were able to mold to our particular collection and our customer base. So it is very unique to us, which I really like. We're able to check the accuracy of classification and labels easier. Label mistakes are more apparent, especially to non-catalogers, but also to catalogers. Classification using a word-based scheme is less daunting for non-catalogers processing new material. I will say that I was not a cataloger. I was not trained as a cataloger. I took a cataloging class, in graduate school, but didn't think that I was going to end up working on a project such as this. And I ended up working on a project such as this and ended up learning quite a bit actually about cataloging that I was able to take back to my branch. The reclassification process is also an opportunity to assess your nonfiction collection for various factors, including age, condition, and use. Coverage, both excess and gaps, may also be ascertained. And a word-based system is better for browsing the collection. As I just mentioned, it was an opportunity for us to basically assess the collection for age, condition, and use. And during this process, we ended up actually weeding out about 10% of our entire collection. And that was either recycled or went to resellers. Most of the material we weeded in the access process was in poor condition or seriously dated material in areas such as health, medical, legal, business, home, craft, hobby, because somebody doesn't necessarily want material about clothing, decorating, or etc. That is really dated. Yeah. So there's always a backside to the positive, and basically some of the problematic areas that we have found with using words is that word-based schemes tend to fall back on ordering things alphabetically, thus losing the ability to utilize other types of relationships in the scheme, such as chronological or geographical. We were used to the relational flexibility in Dewey, and many users miss it in our new scheme. Words also have political, cultural, and emotional meaning that numbers do not, and this has to be accounted for when creating the new scheme. We thought through every word as carefully as we could to make sure that we were not going to offend anyone, while also making sure that the word was appropriate for the material that we were reclassifying. Even though the word-based scheme is simpler to apply than Dewey, it did not necessarily make the classification itself simple. The complexity of classifying material using any scheme is driven by the content of the collection, and material that was difficult to classify using Dewey is still difficult to classify. Very much like social science, which social science was a bear when we tackled it. We put it off and put it off and put it off until we could no longer put it off. And finally, a word-based system that classifies material into groups under broad terms makes it more difficult to find a specific title on the shelf. The cutter can help with this, but the granularity that Dewey allowed in placing items on the shelf in relation to others is lost.
So we skipped a scheme slide. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the relationship among our different sections of our collection, and we're probably a little bit unique in that we have actually divided our nonfiction collections into small location collections and large location collections, as I mentioned earlier. So I just made a kind of schematic of how the collections are divided and kind of how they relate to one another. Obviously, so the light arrows on this scheme are places where the collections are sort of very closely related. They're in the same locations or they cover the same level of material. And those are places where customers may expect things to be in the same place with the same classification from one section of the collection to the other. The parts of the collection with the light arrows were not necessarily, the schemes weren't developed with that as a requirement, that like things be in exactly the same classification. The darker arrows show where some of our collections are closely related, and our final scheme was either taken wholesale, as the teen nonfiction collection was from the small location adult nonfiction scheme, or in the case of the large print, that scheme is the top level categories of the large location scheme. So they are closely related and they correlate very well. What we ended up with was, as we went along, we had to reconcile some of the major differences because of the way our customers needed to use this. And our next slide, okay, excellent. This is an email about a proposed decision on cataloging our animal books in our large location adult collection. In this case, looking at the entirety of only our large location content, the most logical and best scheme that we landed on was to include our animal collection as a subset of nature, our nature topic, whatever nature means, and often we would figure that out as we went along. But as it stands, just looking at that collection, this would be an excellent solution. However, when we got feedback from one of the branch managers, she pointed out that having animals as a subset of nature is different from how the children's collection handled it, where animals is a top level category. And also the problem of relating it to some of the small branch location collections where animals is also a top level category. And although we could look at this portion of the collection as a standalone collection, it is not actually used that way. People go from one part of the collection to the other to use it. Sometimes you rethink things and experiment, and sometimes it works really, really well and you come up with new solutions, and other times it doesn't work so well. And this was one case where, incidentally, we did not use animals as a subheading under nature in our large location adult scheme. And in fact, when we went back to assess our problem areas in our small location and our large location schemes, we decided that we needed to correlate those schemes more closely to ease the use of all of those collections by our staff and our customers. So, multifaceted subject areas, and this is where I get to be like the serious cataloging nerd that I am. What we found and what I'm trying to articulate is that certain sections of your collection, certain subject areas, have a lot of facets to them that are kind of working together. And Dewey has accommodated them one way, and trying to accommodate them with access has been a little bit of a challenge. So, for instance, these were three collections that we thought on the surface were going to be fairly straightforward. It turns out they're really complex. For instance, take history. When you are classifying works about ancient civilization, what you run up against is the fact that location and time period are relative to one another. So your time period that's covered in ancient for Rome and Greece is different than the time period covered by what is accepted as ancient in the New World, in North and South America. And it is yet again different for Chinese civilization. So defining all of that and explaining all of that to your staff who are making these cataloging decisions can be a little bit of a challenge. And then you get into areas like literature and art, where there are even more facets to consider. And you have language, location, genres, time, medium for art, because sculpture, painting, etching, all different. So one of the things that is helpful to consider is to understand that you're dealing with all of these facets. You need to make a decision about basically what part of the facet is going to take precedence when you're making these decisions. What's going to be your primary sorting, what you're going to try to sort in your subheadings, And in literature, if you're familiar with Dewey, which most of us are very familiar with Dewey, you'll know that language and geographic location is kind of the primary aspect that literature gets sorted into, and then it's a genre, time period, etc. When we created our access scheme, we decided that genre was going to take precedence over language and location, and that was an interesting process, and we're not entirely sure we're happy with it. That is one of the areas that we are going to revisit and do some more analysis. But what we did was we made a decision and we stuck with it. We tried to be as consistent as possible in applying it.
All right, so we are starting to wind down on our presentation about access, and at this point we just kind of want to give you guys a couple pieces of advice. And probably our biggest takeaway is if you're going to tackle a project such as this, which was enormous, take good notes and be consistent. Write everything down. Especially your justification for any sticky or controversial parts of the scheme. And just know that not everyone is going to agree 100% with every decision, which makes recording the final decision is accurately extremely important, so that you don't end up debating it again later on. Again, in the heat of getting through the work in the face of deadlines, we didn't always write things down as thoroughly and accurately as we should, but we recognize that that was an area where we probably should have done a little bit better.
So outsourcing, that of course is the elephant in the room when you start creating something that is unique to your own library, because almost everybody outsources at least some portion of their processing. What we have successfully done so far is set up our access classification with Baker and Taylor for our small location material. And it seems to be going pretty well. It did get a little rocky for a little while because, well, we changed our scheme when we edited things, and then we had to catch Baker and Taylor up. So for a while we were correcting and reclassifying a lot of the material that came in the doors. But since we've updated, that has actually gone much more smoothly. We have not yet set Baker and Taylor up with our large location classification scheme because it is very large, and as was pointed out, we didn't always take the best, most detailed notes about every part. So we are challenged with then trying to clarify some parts of the scheme to get it ready for someone else to be able to apply it without our background in having created it. My personal thoughts on outsourcing after many, many years of cataloging and dealing with outsourcing is that outsourcing your cataloging, it's never perfect. That's probably an understatement. We do expect that we have a certain amount of correction that is necessary on an ongoing basis. Some material is just really difficult to classify, as I pointed out earlier. It was difficult to classify in Dewey. It's difficult to classify in Access. We had to make corrections in the Dewey classification for outsourced material. We will have to make corrections for accessed material that comes in. But I actually don't anticipate that the need for making a lot of corrections in Access is going to be any more difficult than doing what we had done all along with Dewey classification.
So one last thought that Melissa and I have about this project is have fun if you're going to do something like this. a tremendous amount of physical work and stress involved in hammering out a brand new scheme that worked more or less. The process for us was also a lot of fun. We argued, we made up silly and outrageous categories that didn't make the final cut. We supported each other. We celebrated milestones. We celebrated birthdays. We did everything we could to make sure that we did not lose our minds during the process, because that could easily happen between the massive renovations that were going on and also this, this whole reclassification scheme. There were a couple of Fridays where we ended up getting really, really silly at the end of the day because we didn't have any brain cells left. But we got through it, and ultimately we became closer as a team because of it.
I always liked to say that I was really getting my money's worth out of my library degree by going through this process. So, and I'm a cataloging nerd, so obviously making up a huge classification scheme is just my kind of fun, right?
Yeah. All right, so that is the end of our presentation. Now we would like to open it up to you guys. If you guys have any questions, we please just ask that you guys use the chat box instead of opening up your mics. And while you guys are getting those questions ready, I'm going to move on to the very last slide, which will have our contact information once again. So if you would like to contact either Melissa or myself, and ask us any questions, that maybe you didn't think of, or, if you want to just get more detailed, about some of the stuff that we talked about, please feel free to send us an email and we will get back to you as soon as we can. So, all right.
So, I have a question pop up. Have you conducted any recent patron or staff surveys? If so, what is the overall feeling of your scheme? We have had some feedback. I actually have not gotten my hands on it at this time. So that is something that we need to explore more. I just need to talk to the right people at Richland Library to get some of that data. What I can say is that we have had some feedback, both positive and negative. And I've had people come in and say, the collection looks beautiful, I really like to browse it. I've had vendor reps come in and take a look at our shelves. Of course, they're kind of approaching from a different angle, but they have been very positive in their impression of the scheme. And then we've had people come in who have had difficulty with it. They've been looking for that one specific thing, used to know exactly where to find it, could walk straight to the shelves, and now they have to browse to find it within a much broader section. And that's a difficulty that I don't think we're ever going to entirely get past, because of the nature of the scheme and the nature of browsing itself.
And I would just like to add on to what Melissa was saying, as somebody who has, bounced back and forth between, working directly with our customers to not working directly with our customers to now working back directly with our customers. We don't have, I don't have specific, survey results, but just kind of based on my interactions with people when I explain it to them, I've seen, especially people who were really not familiar with Dewey at all, their eyes kind of light up whenever they realize, oh, I can just scan this, the spine label really easily and find exactly what I'm looking for. And especially kids, kids can now go over and they can find, what they're looking for much more easily. It has been a bit of a challenge for staff having to get used to trying to figure out how to search in Polaris specifically for things. But once you figure out the best way to search, You know, it's really not any more difficult than looking for Dewey, at least in my opinion.
We have another question. Have you seen any difference in your circulation numbers since making the change? Are people checking out more items? That is a really good question, and unfortunately, we have a very, very difficult time even starting to answer that question. And the reason for that is that in the process of doing all of this work, we have closed branches, opened branches, and had significant parts of our collection in storage and unavailable for circulation.
Yeah.
So our circulation numbers would
not accurately reflect.
It's really hard. It's really hard to compare that in a very direct way. And I deal with usage numbers for electronic resources, and I would need to go and find that information for our physical collection. I haven't done any extensive analyzation of that, and would need to dig that out. I'm going to go back, since there are no other new questions at the moment, I'm going to go back to something that Kristen mentioned, which was searching for material in Polaris. We actually have retained the Dewey information that we had in our BIB records, and that is in our 092 field in the MARC record for people who are familiar with MARC. At one point, we displayed that information kind of up front on our summary screens for our catalog. We very quickly came to the conclusion that we could no longer display that 092 information because two reasons. If we wanted to keep it in the record and have it be searchable in that field, that was misleading as we had access material. It was no longer relevant to that material, although it's very relevant to us. But also, since we have two different schemes, which are sometimes very different, although less so now, deciding which data would be in our 092 field, because you have one shot at that, and one element, one data point can display, that would be misleading if we chose the large location heading classification. Then the small location material wouldn't be maybe in quite the same place.
Right.
So we actually just turned that off. And also, to do a call number search, which is very useful, Polaris is divided into BIB searches and item searches. Item searches search the item record. That's where we go for our access call number searches.
Yes.
But since in the past, the data in the BIB record and the item record was the same, people could use those searches interchangeably. Now they can't. They have to remember which place they're searching.
Oh, how much money? A lot.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not sure how much money we spent on that. We could probably estimate it, but for your own application, probably estimating based on the size of your own collection wouldn't be too big a stretch. I will say we probably spent more money on tape and Post-it notes,
yes,
than on any other thing. Well, the labels were probably
and
relatively pricey.
labels too.
Anything that sticks to anything else seems to be very, very expensive. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we did not share that might be interesting. But it is, very nearly 11 o'clock.
If you have any more questions that come up later, as Kristen said, please feel free to email one of us, and we would be happy to answer those questions. I think that may be all we need to do. Tiffany, do you want to explain how the follow-up is going to work?
We will send the recording out. It should just be a link. We may be able to like put it on YouTube or something, or it might be a GoToMeeting, but I can send that to whoever, the entire list of participants. So probably within the next few days.
Okay, that would be great.
Yeah. Are there any final questions? No?
So if that is it, I'd like to say thank you for coming and listening to us ramble about Access for an hour.
Thank you.
And I hope you found it useful, or at least a little bit interesting. And go and have fun, whatever you do.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.